take your seats, please. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, please. Thank you.
You'll need to speak into the microphone. It's now on. There you go, that's it. Do the job.
I'll just wait for these to come up.
Off you go, do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding if you are able for the President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
Thank you. Let's take a seat.
I declare the opening ceremony of the spring session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly open. Please take your seats. I would like to introduce Congressman Michael R. Turner, head of the U.S. delegation. Congressman Turner, you have the floor.
Well, it's my honor to welcome you to Dayton, Ohio, my hometown, here in the Schuster Center. I know we've had an opportunity to meet several times already as you've been here in Dayton, Ohio. The President has accused me of fixing the weather, and I want to accept full responsibility for that. Many of you, when you got here, of course, it was raining, but I understand we're going to have great weather over the next couple of days. I do want to tell you that I know you know a little bit more about the community that you're in. And one of the things that you've learned along the way is that you're in a town that has the history of the legacy of the Wright brothers, the inventors of flight. And the building that you're in, this Schuster Center, was built while I was mayor. We undertook the implosion of a 1 million square foot department store, a Macy's department store, to build this performing arts center for our community. And we opened it in 2003 in the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' flight. We dedicated it to their flight in 1903, where they first accomplished the first flight of man. And the architect helped us to commemorate that 100th anniversary with what is above you, where a chandelier normally would appear. But above you, appearing in LED lights, is a configuration of the night sky the night before the Wright brothers flew. That is the actual position of the stars the night before the Wright brothers flew, and it's known as the last sky that man was not in. And what we know since that night is that man has been in every sky, and one of those skies, several of those skies, of course, brought you all here to Dayton, Ohio, and we appreciate that their invention has brought us all closer, and of course has brought you all here to Dayton, Ohio. While you're here, we're commemorating also the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accords. The U.S. showed leadership in intervening with our NATO allies to rise up against what we all saw as horrific aggression that was occurring in the Balkans and the unbelievable loss of life, and bringing the leaders of the Balkan area to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to bring an end to the bloodshed and to the horrific war that was occurring there, resulting in the Dayton Peace Accords. Here, while we come together, we are doing a retrospective and a prospective, focusing on the Balkans. What did we learn? What do we need to do as we look at the to-do list for that fragile peace that has held? What do we need to do to ensure it for the future? but also what do we need to know as to what we learned then, how to end conflict and end a war, as we look also to Ukraine. I think when we look to the Balkans, we can all know with confidence that it's important for us as an alliance that we all work together, that we rise up together in the face of aggression. I think that it is a fine line between, as I've said many times with you over the past couple days, between the horrors that we've seen in Srebrenica and Mariupol, and it does take all of us to ensure that the NATO alliance stands against all forms of aggression. Now, what has Dayton's community role been? Well, after the Dayton Peace Accords, I was asked by the administration to participate in helping to build democratic institutions in the Balkan region. I participated with then Commerce Secretary Mickey Cantor in an economic mission to the Balkan region with the intention of establishing relations between the Balkan areas and the city of Dayton. And from that, a number of twinnings occur. Our city of Dayton twinned with Sarajevo, our police department, and a number of our public works functions twinned with Sarajevo, our sanitation department, our water department, but also our chamber, some of our hospitals, our universities twinned in the Balkan areas to help build democratic institutions. This was important not only for our community, but for the Balkan areas as they were coming out of what had been an area of conflict, because they were rebuilding these institutions, but also they were doing so in a way that they had to build confidence in a way that would be responsible and responding to their communities. One of the areas that we also twinned was in the area of arts. Our symphony twinned with the Sarajevo Symphony, and we're all going to be enjoying that relationship as the Sarajevo Symphony has traveled here, and on Sunday they'll be playing for us at the National Air Force Museum, and they'll be staying here in my community and joining with the Dayton Philharmonic and playing on this stage for the Dayton community, joining together with the Dayton Symphony and the Sarajevo Symphony right here for a concert for peace, taking the Balkans' commitments to peace, but also leveraging that to the call for peace in the area of Ukraine. Well, there is certainly as we think of the issue of democratic institutions and building democratic institutions in an area of conflict, there has been no stronger voice in our NATO Parliamentary Assembly than Jerry Connolly for the importance of NATO as a tool and as a voice for democratic institutions. And unfortunately, we lost my friend Jerry Connolly this week. Will you all join me? Will you all join me in a moment of silence in his honor? If you all stand and join me in a moment of silence in Jerry Connolly's honor. Thank you. Well, I know you all join with me in thinking of Jerry and in thinking of NATO's role and in thinking the importance that we, as we look to not only our alliance in serving our constituencies, but in serving the important issues of national, international security, but also democracy. It is now my honor to bring to the podium the governor of the state of Ohio, Mike DeWine. No one represents the spirit of service better than our governor, Mike DeWine. Governor Mike DeWine is a dedicated public servant for more than 4 decades. He has experience of every level of government. He has served as a state senator, U.S. congressman, lieutenant governor, U.S. senator, Ohio attorney general, and now governor of Ohio. Mike DeWine has been a tireless advocate for Ohio's communities, economy, and we would not be being able to be hosted today if it wasn't for the assistance of Governor Mike DeWine. Governor, thank you for welcoming the NATO Parliamentary Assembly to Dayton, Ohio.
Congressman Turner, thank you very, very much. I must tell you all, he is my congressman, so I live in his district. And I'm very proud of, frankly, the major role he's played as chairman for the U.S. delegation, and in the major role he played in bringing the Parliamentary Assembly back to the United States. And we're very, very proud of him. On behalf of the 11 million Ohioans, I want to welcome you to Dayton. I want to welcome you to the state of Ohio. We're excited that your choice as Ohio is the site of this meeting, because as we like to say, Ohio is the heart of it all. And so there's no better place for the Parliamentary Assembly to meet. In addition to being the home of the Wright brothers, as Congressman Turner has told you about, we also have Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Very, very important to our state and to our country. Dayton is, as I said, the birthplace of the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur. It is here that they perfected the art of flying. We joke with our friends in North Carolina that they went down to North Carolina to practice a little bit, and they had wind down there and sand down there, but the real development occurred right here in Dayton and right here in the state of Ohio. Ohio is also the home to the late John Glenn, Marine Corps aviator, astronaut, the first American to orbit the Earth in 1962. Another famous astronaut, the late Neil Armstrong, who in 1969 was the first person to walk on the moon, also called Ohio home. Ohio is the site of NASA Glenn Research Facility in Cleveland. And through the years, Ohio has really created a symbiotic relationship with the aerospace industry. Our state is also a leader in manufacturing and in agriculture. You go back throughout our history, these are the two things when you think about Ohio, is our manufacturing and our agriculture. Ohio is a great place to live, a great place to work, great place to hold important gatherings like this. So we are very, very glad that all of you are here. Thank you. It's significant to note that this meeting, of course, falls near the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accords, which were so important to NATO's efforts to ensure global safety and security 3 decades ago. Of those accords, the late former Secretary of State Warren Christopher said, and I quote, "I trust that one day people will look back on Dayton and say, this is the place where the fundamental choices were made. This is where the parties chose peace over war, dialogue over destruction, reason over revenge. And this is where each of us accepted the challenge to make those choices meaningful and to make them endure." End of quote. Secretary of State Christopher's words continue to ring true today. As we all know, just last year, NATO celebrated 75 years since the organization's founding. We very much appreciate NATO's commitment to using political and military means to guarantee the freedom and security of its members. By promoting democratic values and allowing members to consult on defense and on security issues, NATO is vital to all our country's collective abilities to solve problems, build trust, and to prevent conflict. Ohio is a crucial link in the NATO mission. Just a few miles from this spot at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, new technologies are developed and acquired in support of our own NATO operations and for sales to our European allies. By using common aircraft and tactics throughout Europe, NATO demonstrates its shared strength, which is fundamental to deterring threats to the security of member nations. 1984, then President Ronald Reagan said, and I quote, referencing NATO, "Established in the dark aftermath of the most destructive war the world had ever seen, the NATO alliance represents a living commitment of the nations of the West to the defense of democracy and individual liberty." End of quote. Now in its 77th year, NATO is just as essential to global freedom and security as it was upon its founding. That fact lends added significance, I think, to this meeting. Again, we thank you for being here. We're proud that we are hosting you. We extend our best wishes to each of you for a successful meeting of NATO's Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you very much.
Governor DeWine, Congressman Turner, thank you for your remarks, and let me start by also expressing my profound sadness for the loss of former President Jerry Connolly. He was an extraordinary leader of this Assembly, and I am personally grateful that I could always count on his sound and fair advice as former President. He will be greatly missed. Excellencies, colleagues, I opened the 2025 spring session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly together with Congressman Mike Turner, who I want to thank on behalf of the entire membership for bringing the Assembly back to the United States for its 7th U.S. session in our 70-year history of the first one in 22 years. We are profoundly grateful to you and to the strong bipartisan U.S. delegation for your exceptional dedication and commitment to the NATO alliance and the unique transatlantic bond. We meet here 30 years after the Dayton Peace Accords were signed in this very town. The Dayton Peace Accords remain today as essential foundation for stability in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in the broader region. And we have with us a remarkable lineup of high-level speakers and officials to help us reflect on the many lessons learned. One of the most devastating conflicts in European soil since the Second World War came to an end because we had the moral clarity of our shared democratic values to guide us, because as allies we acted in unison and drew on the resolute unity that underpins our credibility, and because we brought to bear our collective strengths to a problem that neither North America or Europe could have solved alone. These are the virtues of this indispensable alliance: clarity, unity, strength. If we applied them to the most difficult security environment in the generation, we will succeed and continue to protect the security of the 1 billion people living under NATO's roof. Colleagues, excellencies, in less than 5 weeks, Allied heads of state and government will hold an extraordinary important NATO summit in The Hague. It is a crucial opportunity for NATO allies to demonstrate these virtues again. Right here in Dayton, we, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, representing the voice of all 32 member parliaments and all political stripes, must unite around a clear message. The summit must strengthen and rebalance NATO, that so it remains the essential bulwark keeping the citizens of Europe and North America safe. To do this, first, we must shift the transatlantic burden and responsibility within NATO, adopt a new, robust defense investment plan well beyond 2% of GDP, urgently develop our industrial base, and take back the lead in new technologies. Second, as autocrats are closing ranks, so must we. We must increase our resilience and better counter their hybrid warfare against our countries and their challenge to the rules-based international order. As parliamentarians, we are on the front line of the struggle to defend our democratic way of life. NATO must be too. This is why this Assembly will continue to press for the establishment of a Center for Democratic Resilience at NATO headquarters. Third, allies must also make clear they stand with Ukraine, as we have from day one. We must remain unwavering in our support for Ukraine's democracy, independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, right to self-defense and self-determination, and unwavering in the principles this alliance stands for, including the principle that no third country should have a veto over NATO membership. We support all efforts to bring the war to an end. We commend the United States leadership and commend Ukraine for demonstrating time and again its full commitment. The United States can count on its allies to work together hand in hand and with Ukraine to build a just and lasting peace. The only road to peace is through strength, because how this war ends will define the world we and our children live in. The outcome of any negotiation will set the precedent for global security. For 70 years, this Assembly has carried the voice of allied citizens and helped strengthen our indispensable NATO alliance. For 70 years, we have made the case to our citizens that NATO provides the essential bedrock of our security, the security of Europe and that of North America. Today, as we confront an unprecedented set of challenges which threatens the very foundations of our democratic way of life and our international system, our role as the elected representatives of our people and guardians of democracy is more important than ever. Inspired by the lessons of history, let us rise to the occasion. And here, in Dayton, as we commemorate two symbolic anniversaries, let us reaffirm we stand united, strong together, guided by the clarity of our mission to defend peace, security, and democracy. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to welcome Chris Landau, Deputy U.S. Secretary of State. Mr. Landau, thank you for your leadership. We are just 5 weeks away from a very important NATO summit in The Hague, the first for the new U.S. administration. We appreciate that the administration's message on NATO has been consistent. It wants a stronger NATO, and it wants a fairer NATO, in which Europe and Canada step up. We want the same. The summit must strengthen NATO and rebalance the transatlantic burden so that NATO remains the essential bulwark keeping the citizens of Europe and North America safe. And this Assembly, bringing together the elected representatives of our 1 billion citizens, will continue to send a strong, united message to do just so. In fact, here in Dayton, we will adopt our recommendations for the Hague Summit, which call on allied leaders to take NATO deterrence and defense to the next level. Deputy Secretary of State, we are looking forward to your remarks. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and it's a real honor and pleasure to be here today to speak to you. On behalf of President Trump and Secretary Rubio, I'd like to thank Governor DeWine and Congressman Turner for hosting us. I'd also like to thank all of the assembled dignitaries who have traveled here from all over the world, and especially from Europe and the Balkans. I'm delighted to welcome you to our country and honored to have you here today. We're gathered here in a very special place at a very special time. Dayton, Ohio is the home of the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville, who dreamed of powered airplanes and made that dream a reality on a December day in 1903 in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. It never ceases to amaze me that this very first powered flight took place just 60 years before I was born, at a time when my own grandfather was already 20 years old. The human race has come a long way in the historical blink of an eye, for good and for ill. We're also here at a special time, 30 years after the peace accords for Bosnia were negotiated in this very city. For individuals or for nations, there are few more noble endeavors than seeking peace for yourself or others. And obviously, seeking and promoting peace is the whole point of diplomacy, which is my current job. So we honor those who came together in this place 30 years ago to hammer out peace accords. Does that mean that those peace accords are perfect? Of course not. Most peace accords represent an attempt at compromise. Compromise is often not pretty. Nobody gets 100% of what they want, but it's better than nothing at all. The Dayton Accords of 30 years ago were heralded as heroic and historic, and indeed, they did stop civilian bloodshed. But from the very beginning, the United States summarized its goal as an agreement that was, quote, clear, limited, and achievable, unquote. This modesty of means and ends is appealing. I'm here today not to lecture, but to listen to those of you from Bosnia and the region. We in the Trump administration are willing to provide our good offices to improve conditions, but only if our involvement is wanted and warranted. I know this hasn't always been the spirit in which American officials have approached foreign policy. But in this regard, as in many others, the Trump administration is willing to try a different approach, and I'm proud to represent this new thinking. In fact, my own personal background has prepared me perfectly to represent this new thinking. My father was a career U.S. diplomat. I was born in Madrid, Spain, while he was serving at the U.S. Embassy there. And I grew up not here in the United States, but in several countries in South America where he served as U.S. ambassador. So while I've been an American since the moment I was born, I'm also used to seeing the United States and the world through the eyes of others. I expect and respect different viewpoints and recognize that not everyone is or wants to be exactly like me or my fellow Americans. We can love and be proud of our own country while recognizing the vast diversity of all the Earth's peoples and cultures. President Trump picked up on this theme last week in his important foreign policy address in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He acknowledged the disaster of U.S. efforts at nation building around the world in recent decades and decried the arrogance of those who get off airplanes in foreign lands and think that they have all the answers. What does this mean for Bosnia-Herzegovina? It means that we're willing to listen to and to work with all affected parties. Agreements must be firm to hold, but you must be flexible to adjust to changing times. Let me be clear. The United States is not offering unlimited means for undefined, uncertain, or unrealistic ends. This basic point is lost on too many advocates for remaking foreign societies along utopian lines. We're not interested in imposing a vision of a society that reflects the preferences of distant bureaucrats and narrow activists. The United States can be a willing partner with considerable political capital. We can work hard, but we will work only with those committed to a practical realism for their own countries. We reject the two untenable extremes of wishing for transcendent transformation on the one hand, or relitigating ancient grievances on the other. Endlessly expansive policy without restraint or historical humility becomes an enemy of strategy and constitutional statecraft. That is not our purpose, our function, or our mission. People and societies are resilient, but they must choose to be resilient. And here I am talking not simply of leaders, but of people. Durability and flexibility are hard to balance. Settlement agreements, both flexible and durable, require the consent and the consensus of all parties on the ground. They must reflect regional conditions and realities rather than simply idealized and abstract impositions from above or from far away. When different nationalities and value systems exist side by side, peace depends not on a military victory, which simply sets the stage for a rematch, but on compromises that allow all sides to live together. Peace and development are defined by the human beings who must live with the consequences, not by lawyers, of whom I'm one, academics, or think tanks. So I think we can say that the Dayton Accords were a success without saying that the Accords are perfect, either in theory or in practice. I'm here to express the Trump administration's willingness to listen and play a constructive role for all parties. In conclusion, to the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina and its neighbors, we extend a hand of friendship and a willingness to help. And to all of you, I appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you.
Deputy Secretary of State, thank you for your remarks and for coming to speak to us today. We now come to a panel discussion entitled Then and Now, Re-examining the Balkan Situation in a Post-Dayton World. This discussion is important and pertinent because this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accords. The Dayton Accords were negotiated at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is only a short distance away from where our Assembly is meeting today. These landmark agreements ended the Bosnian War. The 30th anniversary of the Accords provides an opportunity to consider both what lessons we can learn for today and what challenges remain. I am privileged to introduce our panel of leaders who have played key roles in the negotiations of the Dayton Peace Accords and remain informed voices on the challenges and opportunities in the Western Balkans. Our panel consists of His Excellency Christopher Hill, former United States Ambassador to Serbia, Carl Bildt, former Prime Minister of Sweden, and Her Excellency Dame Karen Pierce, former United Kingdom Ambassador to the United States and Special Envoy to the Western Balkans, and Weston Clark, United States General, retired. This discussion will be moderated by the President of the Atlantic Council, Fred Kemp. Fred, please, you have the floor. If he's around. Okay. They're coming. Mr. Kemp, please, you take on operations.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I want to, in particular, salute Representative Turner, Mike, Chairman Turner, all the many titles you've earned for your own remarks. As a former mayor of Dayton, it's just such an honor for me to be in your city for the first time for me, and experience the warmth and the welcoming manner of everyone here. As a member of Congress since 2022, former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, senior member of Armed Services Committee, one of the most significant voices on the Hill, security, defense, intelligence, and alliance issues. Many of us, when Representative Turner asks us to jump, we say, how high? So thank you so much for having us here. 30 years ago, in November 1995 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base here in Dayton, the leaders of Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina came together with U.S. President Bill Clinton and signatories from across Europe, including the UK, Germany, and France, to sign a general framework agreement for peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The formal name the formal name for what became known as the Dayton Accords, Dayton Agreement. The agreements weren't perfect, as Chris Landau said, but they were proof that when American leadership alongside allies is strategic, persistent, values-driven, supported by credible military leverage, peace is possible, even in the most fractured of circumstances. Yet as we open up this panel, it's worth remembering that Dayton, to a certain extent, was also born of failure. Specifically, the failure of deterrence to stop a war unfolding in Europe's backyard, a war that had claimed more than 100,000 lives. For nearly 4 years, 3.5 years, diplomacy faltered, peacekeepers who were humiliated, genocide unfolded in Srebrenica, the worst in Europe since the Holocaust. It was through U.S. leadership that peace became possible alongside our European partners. So, the way I want to launch this panel is not to commemorate history, which we're also doing, but to a certain extent to interrogate history. To ask what lessons the Dayton Accords still offer us in a time when war again rages in Europe, and when deterrence again to a certain extent seems to have failed us. We do it at a time when the United States doesn't seem to be in a mood for a Balkans-like intervention. And it still remains unclear whether Europe has all the capabilities and political will it needs to step up in Ukraine. So the question today for our panelists is, what are the lessons? What can be applied? What can't be applied? And I can't imagine, and maybe not directly to Ukraine, but perhaps for transatlantic relations, certainly for the future. Can't imagine a better group to address this. I'll start with Carl Bildt, former Swedish Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. He was here as Vice Chair of the talks. Carl, was that right? And Special Representative. Yes. Okay, and then let me go around. He'll be followed by General Wesley Clark, former Supreme Allied Commander. But at that time, General Clark, you'd come from being J5 to be with Richard Holbrooke in the delegation. You'll tell us a little bit about more of that when you step in. And Ambassador Chris Hill, I believe, Chris, you were in Dayton working for Holbrooke as a member of the negotiating team.
Yeah.
And he's been ambassador to most countries in the world. No, this is a little joke. But he has been ambassador to Serbia, to Macedonia, to Poland, to Iraq, to South Korea. And acting in Albania, I think, as well. Dame Karen Pierce, who until recently was one of the most extraordinary ambassadors the UK has brought to Washington, and that says a lot, now serves as UK Special Envoy to the Western Balkans, so she'll bring us up to date on the region and where Dayton has left it 30 years later, with what challenges and opportunities. Before we get started, only one short commercial moment for the Atlantic Council. We encourage you to stay up to date with the Atlantic Council's programming on the Western Balkans by following the excellent work of our Europe Center, led by Jörn Fleck, and specifically its Balkans Forward initiative. We're very proud of its work. We're committed to continuing to build on the long and fruitful relationship the U.S. has had with the countries of that region. So let me open up, starting with Carl, and then so Prime Minister Bildt, General Clark, and then down the line. And maybe this first question everyone can deal with a little bit, what are the lessons of Dayton for today, particularly but not only in respect to Ukraine?
Thank you, Fred. And let me start by saying it's very nice to be back and see Dayton, because those of us who were here, three of us, 30 years ago, we never really saw Dayton. They locked us up at an air base in the suburbs, and we were literally not allowed to leave. We had a French representative, if you remember him, and he considered this to be an insult to humanity, the kind of food that the US Air Force fed us with. So he brought us out one or two evenings, I think, to an excellent French restaurant, which I have to say, sorry to say, has gone bankrupt since. But apart from that, we were in Dayton, but we've never seen Dayton, so it's nice to be back. Lessons to be learned? Well, first, peace agreements are extremely rare. I mean, modern European history, there are only two, really. There's Dayton, and there's a Good Friday Agreement. And there are similarities there, while there are other cases where it's been miserable failure. Cyprus is the most obvious. And these are there are similarities between these sorts of conflicts that we're dealing with. The dissolution of Yugoslavia was an immensely complicated process. Bosnia was part of that. Bosnia was, of course, a mini Yugoslavia in itself. So when Yugoslavia fell apart, keeping Bosnia together was not an entirely easy thing. There was success in Dayton, yes, but it should also be said that there was massive failure prior to Dayton due to disagreements across the Atlantic, disagreements in Europe, and disagreements in the United States. I vividly remember during the Dayton days, the disagreements in the United States. And it was only, and that is one of the lessons, only when international actors can get together with a uniform message and policy that result can be achieved. And that was really the lesson of Dayton. It was only when we got our act together, all of us, that we were able to had an impact. Prior to that, there had been failure. Should also be said, in all fairness to history, you said that this was Dick Holbrooke, who was sort of impresario, or whatever we should call him, king, emperor, or whatever, and immensely important, needless to say. And then there was me with the Europeans. Then we also had Amazing Love, the first deputy foreign minister of Russia, sitting with us at the air base for 3 weeks, and essentially playing also him a rather constructive role. He didn't sign the military annex at the end of the day, but eventually also Russia contributed forces to the peacekeeping mission. Those were the days.
And lessons for Ukraine from those days?
None. None, because as I said, this is a different kind of conflict where you have what you have in Ukraine is called Russia trying to rebuild an empire. It is state aggression of the most obvious kind. If you take the three examples that I mentioned, I mean, the dissolution of Yugoslavia, the stability of Cyprus, Northern Ireland, and sort of all of those issues, it is a more complicated thing. It has to do with multicultural and multi-ethnic societies and state building in those, in situations where previous frameworks fracture. Which was the Yugoslav case, which was the Cyprus case, which was the Ireland case. So it's a different thing.
So, General Clark, lessons for today from Dayton, and maybe you can share some of your swimming episodes, too, from the negotiations.
Yes, Igor Ivanov and I were swimming buddies at Dayton, and we got along well. And we persuaded Russia to go along with what we wanted, even though we knew at the time that Russia didn't really want this. So I came into the scene as a J5 in 1994. I did the first U.S.-Russian military staff talks. And in Moscow in the summer of '94, the Russian General Staff asked me, "How soon will your NATO ships be in our port of Riga?" And I said, "It's not your port. But the more you ask, the sooner they'll be there." And I don't think they really understood what I was saying. In 1995, during the negotiation, I flew with our Deputy Secretary of State to Moscow, and the Russian Chief of the General Staff told me, he said, "We know what you Americans are doing. You're coming into our part of Europe. And you say you'll be gone in a year, but you won't be." I said, no, we've signed an agreement. We're only going to be there for a year. He said, "Please, we're Russians. We know you. But we would do the same thing if we were in your position." So there were still antibodies against the United States exhibited by Russia, even in the mid-1990s. But what's the primary lesson of Bosnia, I think? Don't be timid. Please, diplomats, statesmen, don't be timid in looking at an operation like this. When I came on the scene in 1994, we had UNPROFOR deployed. We had a fine British three-star in charge. We had excellent troops from France, Denmark, UK, Germany, and they were powerless because they hadn't been properly equipped, but more importantly, the rules of engagement prevented them from using their military skills to accomplish a mission. They only could use force in self-defense. And then they got a sort of modification that said, well, you could use force in sort of in helping accomplish the mission. And finally, in the spring of 1995, President Chirac and Prime Minister of UK decided to deploy 2 artillery pieces to Mount Igman to show their intent that they were tired of the Serb humiliation of UNPROFOR. It was really after Srebrenica that the United States came in with NATO, and we actually executed a very limited set of bombing strikes. So Chris and I and our delegation were with Milosevic during that period. We were at the hunting lodge. Holbrooke and I and Milosevic were taking a walk around the lake. And Milosevic said, "I believe these airstrikes are very harmful for peace." And I said, "Mr. President, I believe they're very helpful for peace. So if you'll stop, the airstrikes will stop." After Dayton was done, as Holbrooke left, and I was there, he said, "Wes," he said, "go say goodbye to Slobo." So I went to see President Milosevic, and he said, "You know, General Clark," he said, "we Serbs never had a chance against your NATO, your airplanes, your missiles." It was the forcefulness of international intervention that brought that conflict to a close. Don't be timid. We're looking at Ukraine today. I see great similarities. I see a timid international response. I see a nation struggling to defend itself and really fighting for the freedom of all the rest of us against a breakdown in the rules of international order. And I don't see the strong, unified, U.S.-led international response. Instead, I see the same quivering and quavering that marked the early days of UNPROFOR. Nations making commitments, worried about the safety of their troops, asking themselves, well, could we get in a lawsuit over this? What will be the diplomatic ramifications in New York? And on and on and on. It finally led to the United States' real engagement in 1995 with what ultimately was the Dayton Peace Accords. Is there a lesson here for Ukraine? Absolutely. If you want to stop aggression, if you want to hold fast to the rules-based international order, you've got to come together. You've got to face up to the reality of this. This is not going to be changed after the next election in Germany, in Hungary, in France. I've been through this with NATO. Every 3 months there's an election. Everybody says, well, after the next election, oh, when this gets changed. We're not going to do that here. This is a pre-planned operation by Russia, long in the making, and this is not the end of it. And we cannot mislead ourselves and our publics. This is no longer business as usual. If we want the Europe that we saw from 1989 and the future of a Europe free and whole from the Atlantic to the Urals, we're going to have to not be timid. We're going to have to be unified, and we're going to have to be forceful enough to persuade Mr. Putin that he cannot win. Right now he thinks he's winning, and I look at all of you and the nations you represent. We have far more economic power, far more military potential, far more population than he has. How could he think he could prevail? The same way Slobodan Milosevic thought he could pull the eyes over Europe in 1992, 3, and 4 with his small army overrunning Bosnia. He didn't get away with it. With your leadership and your commitment, Mr. Putin won't get away with it either. Thank you.
Thank you. So you've already heard some nuanced differences of approach between General Clark and Prime Minister Bildt. So let me turn to Ambassador Hill. Chris, please pick up on what you've heard so far, but take it a step further to the whole personality of Richard Holbrooke as well.
Okay, I'll do that. But first I want to talk about the personality of Dayton, because it was a fabulous place to have a peace agreement. I remember one time we had a terrible night, and when we say we were there 21 days, it was actually 21 days and nights. I mean, they'd go on and on. It was particularly desultory meeting. We come back to our long corridor in the visiting officer quarters. We called it the Pozovina corridor. It was very long. And on the left side of it were all these 8x10 colorings done by kids, first graders in the Dayton school system, told by their teachers to draw a picture that for you means peace. So there was a lot of, stick figures holding hands. There were, a lot of sun, trees. It was really quite moving. I mean, my God. So it was a great place to have such a peace agreement. And, we called it at the time, it had this very State Department type prosaic name called the Proximity Peace Talks. And fortunately, in the branding of it, it became just Dayton. So let me just...
by the way, I just love these first-person stories, so the more any of the three of you
don't get us going on that.
Yeah.
But let me just say, first of all, real quick on the accomplishments, that was one miserable war. I mean, we're talking 100,000, more than 100,000 people killed. We're talking about people trying to, change an ethnographic map, because what had happened, of course, was, the complexity of the Balkans, a complexity that sometimes exceeds the interest today of people trying to understand it, was enormous. I mean, you had Serbs all over the place. You had republic borders being turned into international borders, and so the Serbs didn't accept that. So you had a conflict. But you also had conflict between the Croats and the Bosniaks, and it was a three-way conflict that really, we had tried so many different approaches, and when I say we, I'm talking everybody. I mean, this was an all-hands-on-deck issue with the Europeans and the U.S., the UN, NATO, I mean, all kinds of people, and we weren't able to get it done, so we did it in Dayton. And one of the big questions was, why in Dayton? And the point was that a lot of people doubted whether the U.S. would be serious about a conflict in a small country far away. And I think, going to the question of Holbrooke, he had this just utter concept of, he had a strategic concept, and he said, if we're going to show that we are serious about ending this conflict, we should put it in the U.S. And again, that was heavily contested. My favorite bad idea was, well, I guess we can be involved with it, but we don't want to put it in the U.S., so why don't we put it on an American naval vessel somewhere in the Mediterranean? I mean, you wouldn't believe the number of bad ideas which came up on that. I mean, can you imagine sitting on a destroyer somewhere in, off the coast of Italy or something? So we decided to put it in Dayton, and the Americans were going to stick with it. The second important thing was to make Europeans our full partners. First of all, they know a thing or two about the region, sometimes more than the Americans. I mean, if you look at some of the books about great peace agreements, like in Versailles, you see, in case of Woodrow Wilson, I mean, he wasn't schooled on some of these place names and these places like Slovakia, etc. So the Europeans kind of understood this, but I think together it was the whole was greater than the sum of the parts, and we worked very closely with all of our European allies and partners there. And I think it's very important to understand that Holbrooke, I mean, he was a force of nature. I mean, for me, he was my mentor, but very much also my tormentor. And he was a tough guy to deal with. But in between things, he would say stuff that was so important, and you just stopped and thought, my God, why didn't I think of that? Before Dayton, we had agreed principles. The first set of agreed principles explained how Bosnia would be divided. And I was a little concerned about this. You have to remember the time. It was just a few years after Europe had just been unified. So now we're going to divide this little country in the Balkans. And so then Holbrooke said, okay, we're going to do the second agreed principles. We're just going to start with the next agreed principle, which happened to be the number 4. And I said, well, why don't we just continue with the first? He said, I want to show that, yes, we're going to show how the two entities are going to live together, but then we're going to show how Bosnia is one country. So he put them together. I mean, we really grommeted them. And so we worked on that basis. And just one other thing that was great about Holbrooke, because often people see him as a lone ranger. He wasn't. He wasn't. He got us all involved. I mean, he didn't care who you were, where you came from. I remember he'd be talking to some awful person. I'd say, why are you talking to that awful person? He says, you never know. And so he understood the need to really take the what people knew from different corners. So he involved our embassies. It was great. He had Peter Galbraith there from our embassy in Zagreb. Peter had some staff there as well. They'd been working on some of these issues in Eastern Slavonia. He had Rudy Perina there from the embassy in Belgrade. See, we understood this is a team sport, and you got to have everyone there. And most importantly, you had to be together with the Europeans, because after all, it's their continent. So I think when you think of what happened, the end of the war, we reinforced the European-U.S. relationship at a time after the Cold War where people were sort of wondering, what's that for? I mean, do we really need that anymore? So he reinforced that, and certainly NATO with Wes. You were kind of representing NATO in the J5, but you weren't in the position yet. But so it was very clear that NATO was going to bind us all. And, the irony of Bosnia, when we had UN forces there who were brave in these far-off places, we really needed NATO. And then by the time we had the peace agreement, there was not one shot fired in anger, and we could have done with the UN. So that was the irony of it. Ultimately, I think the real lessons are very clear, that we've got to work with partners and allies. You know, Napoleon once said, "My greatest strength is I have no allies." Well, that was, of course, before Waterloo. And I think it's pretty clear you gotta bring friends and allies to the fight. And you had to have a singleness of purpose, and that's where Holbrooke comes in. You've got to make the point that, hey, this is over, guys. No more fighting. We're done with that. You know, this is game, set, match. So stop it. And, you know, no one dared continue things because we had a pretty mean machine out there, NATO, where anyone who wanted to set up a checkpoint, and I must say, if you live in the Balkans, you know that I remember General Rupert Smith, the British general, once said that every kid in the Balkans grows up wanting to own his own checkpoint. So you want to make sure there aren't going to be any checkpoints. You have freedom of movement. I mean, these were all kind of courageous decisions. We took things like international human rights, which was kind of the purview of NGOs, and said, no, we're going to rivet this into a real traditional interstate agreement. So we did that with human rights and ombudsman for human rights. These things, it was kind of ahead of its time. So now you come to a situation in Ukraine, but there's one condition that we had in NATO where I think people were ready for peace, and I'm not sure Russia is ready for peace. They should be, but they don't seem to be. And I think until they are, we've got to help Ukraine, because 100 years from now, I mean, there are a lot of issues out there, but people won't remember them. They will remember what we did in Ukraine, and I think our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren will be thinking about what we did to deal with this crisis. And, you know, I know there's a lot of pessimism right now. It's gone on a lot longer than we thought. Well, the Bosnian wars went on even longer than that. There's a lot of pessimism, but I think people need to understand if you're doing the right thing, it takes a while. You know, the arc of history will bend toward justice, and I think that's where we'll be. Thank you.
Terrific answer and terrific opening answers. So, Ambassador Pierce, Dame Karen Pierce, fast forward to today. You're now responsible for the UK and looking at the region, guiding things. What are the lessons from Dayton then as you apply them to today?
Thank you, Fred. So I was in the embassy in Washington while you were all at Dayton. I was forwarding Pauline Neville-Jones's mail. But it was interesting that even that little distance was quite helpful, and I wanted to support what General Clark said about intervention generally and not being timid, but I would add to that a diplomatic injunction, if you like, not to engage in wishful thinking. But right at the start of the conflict, I think we all hoped it would just go away or peter out. And that led us into certain choices that later proved much harder to deal with than they would have done if we'd tackled them at the moment. So I think that's one lesson. And I think air power, the use of air power, is one that we still perhaps shy away from, whether we're thinking of Iraq, whether we're thinking of Afghanistan, whether we're thinking of Syria, as well as Ukraine. And then I think, above all for Dayton, what stays with me now is that it was a brilliant agreement. It stopped a war. It was backed by a Chapter 7 Security Council resolution, something that gets forgotten a little bit too much, including in the UN itself. But it also, if I may say so, carries the seeds of its own problems. It didn't have a review clause. And the one lesson I took away was that somehow when you draw out these amazingly important peace agreements, you need to think about the 10 years, 20 years, 30 years into the future. Because if Dayton had a review clause, some of the problems we're encountering now in its implementation would be easier to manage. We might want to change the review clause, but the fact that there was one, I think, would actually be easier now in the context of helping Bosnia and Herzegovina develop as a mature and prosperous, stable and secure state in Europe. And then the other thing I'd say, because it's not been touched on, I do think the breakup of Yugoslavia had some very serious lessons and implications for the United Nations. I don't actually think I subscribe to what Ambassador Hill said. I think it put paid, for example, to the Brian Urquhart notion of UN peacekeeping having a material and important effect on the ground. UNPROFOR did not have that effect. When Brian Urquhart first started UN peacekeeping in the 50s, it had real, tangible, serious results. People did what the UN force on the ground told them. And UNPROFOR could not have been more different. And the UN has never got back to the Brian Urquhart way of doing peacekeeping, and I think that's a problem for the international community, and I would argue it began with Bosnia. And then the last lesson, looking back, I'd draw, but I think this really is relevant to almost all internal conflicts today when we have a peace agreement. It would not be relevant to Ukraine. The importance of policing. We keep putting troops in and we keep giving them important tasks, but they're not policemen. And we keep asking them to do things that policemen ought to be doing. And even today, there is not a strong international way of putting in police to assist a country come out of conflict.
Thank you so much for that answer. So I see Carl wanting to jump in here, and let's stick with our two Europeans. Please respond to what you've heard, Carl. But maybe the two of you can also talk about how the Western Balkans fits into now to the Europe that's in a moment of reflection about its competitiveness, about modernizing defense policies, about adapting to today's geopolitics, great power competition. Could the Western Balkans get lost in all this, or where does it fit in? But Carl, I know you might have had something else on your mind as well.
I of course agree with nearly everything, but not everything. There is a review clause, in the sense that the Annex 4, which is the Constitution, includes provisions how you change the Constitution. But changing the Constitution is not our thing. It is for the Bosnians to develop. There was an initial Constitution, and I remember saying that this is the Constitution that you wanted because it was a product of negotiation and a lot of Yugoslav stuff, which we don't particularly were that happy with, but it was their constitution. And then we had these particular provisions in it, say, here, go ahead and change it. That has turned out to be slightly problematic, to put it in the mildest possible way. The second, just to say about UNPROFOR, because it's easily a bit critical. UN peacekeeping is dependent upon what the Security Council gives as a mandate for the poor soldiers out there. And the mandate that the UN soldiers had was to protect the delivery of humanitarian help, period. It was not a peacekeeping force because there was no peace. It was not a peace enforcement force because there was no peace agreement. It was simply to protect the delivery of humanitarian help, which it did. And then at the end came in, as Wes said, the artillery, which was highly, I mean, air power is popular, but I remember the artillery around Sarajevo, the immense precision and persistent firepower that de facto broke the siege of Sarajevo. You can hardly do that with air power. But Fred's question, where are we? What worries me, there is peace in the Balkans. That's fine. Is there harmony in the Balkans? Somewhat more debatable, but could be worse. so we should not be overly pessimistic. What worries me is, I think, the fact that the social and economic development has been lagging due to the fact that they have not resolved some of the policy issues. Bosnia has lost a quarter of its population since the war. A quarter of its population since the war. They're queuing up to go to Germany. They're not alone, by the way. Bulgaria is even worse. Croatia is not too good either. Serbia the same. And they are leaving the region. Why? Because the region is lagging behind in economic development. If you look at I looked up the figures now to be on the safe side. But the Serbian economy is roughly 50% better. The Serbian economy is 50 GDP per capita. Serbia is 50% ahead of Bosnia. Croatia is 100% ahead of Serbia. They are all significantly behind the rest of the EU. And accordingly, we see these social and economic issues. They can only be sorted out by sort of more of integration, more of cooperation and more of integration. That's the way we did it in Europe and other parts of the world. And there has to be more determined step to do that. European Union integration is absolutely key on that. And we are in a new situation. There will be, I think, new members of the European Union by 2030. I'm not entirely certain, but I'm fairly certain that will be the case. And the Balkans must not miss that particular train as well, because the next train, I think, is going to leave the station significantly later. And if one misses that particular train, I think these particular figures that I mentioned, young people leaving, economies lagging behind, that might be even more acute 10 or 15 years down the road.
So what new members do you predict by 2030? And how has the war in Ukraine changed that enlargement picture?
Well, I mean, what has given you impetus to enlargement is, of course, Ukraine.
Yeah.
Fairly obviously. I belong to those that believe that we can do Ukraine by 2030, provided that we defend Ukraine, to go back to that particular issue. You'd need to do Moldova as well for all sorts of reasons. And then we have in the Balkans, we have the Albanians doing fairly well. We have the Montenegro is a fairly fragile place, but they're doing well. We do have some problems with North Macedonia, which is not the problem of North Macedonia, but inside the EU, as a matter of fact. And then we have sort of Bosnia needs to get its act together. So, which is perfectly possible, in my opinion.
So I see Ambassador Hill, Chris, reaching for his microphone. You have been most recently Ambassador to Serbia, so why don't you step in where Ambassador Pierce left off?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just real quick on the UN. You know, in the United States, even though we were part of the founding capital of the UN, I mean, and we should be very proud of that, it's always a tough sell to tell Americans to support the UN. And so I think one of the problems of the mandate, as Carl mentioned, was it made the UN forces look weak, even though it's absolutely not their fault. And when it made them look weak, you had a lot of people in this country saying, see, there they go again. They can't seem to do anything. And it wasn't their fault. It was the fault of the mandate. So that was the only point I was making on that. But let me just turn real quickly to the issue of new members. You know, it is the fate of every American diplomat to support every country in the world in joining the European Union. I mean, we will never backtrack from that. I mean, any country that wants to join the European Union should waltz right in, according to us. We have the Canadians as new. In fact, it's a complex process, and I do believe that the European Union, you know how the Europeans always say that Americans do the right thing after they've tried everything else? I think the European Union is on to the right thing, which is this idea of a European Union that might have members who are part of the single market, not yet voting members, trying to make sure that the inclusion is complete and you don't create a situation where you have tensions in the region because so-and-so got the phone call and so-and-so didn't get the phone call. So that's an issue. If you recall Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic back in the 90s, there was a lot of criticizing of each other, this idea, oh, pick me, don't pick him, and that elbow the other guy out of the picture. And so finally, I think those countries realized this was not a good way to get into the European Union. So they met in a little town in Hungary called Visegrad, and they called it the Visegrad process, where they stopped criticizing each other and started coordinating their advance into the European Union. And lo and behold, they all got in. I think in terms of the Europeans, I think becoming very strategic about how to do this, and I am optimistic about 2030. I think the Balkan countries need to get a little more strategic. I think they need to understand that the year is 2025. We have this horrific situation in Ukraine, not to mention what's gone on in Gaza, what could have gone on in India, Pakistan, and yet you have Balkan leaders getting up and saying, choose me because this other guy is terrible. People don't want to hear that. They're sick of it. It's gone on for decades. And I think the best thing would be if the countries themselves got together and said, we got to change our act. Because people just don't want to hear country X bad-mouthing country Y at some conference. They're tired of it. So I hope that can be a more strategic approach applied by the Balkan countries. And ultimately, I think, again, back to being an American diplomat who thinks everyone should be in, Europeans, that is your fate too. I mean, you create probably the greatest creation on the European continent in centuries. It's not an economic agreement. It was an agreement to prevent war and ensure that there would be harmony in important situations such that people would never go to war. I mean, that's what the European Union was all about from its origins in the 50s. So you've used the word European. I mean, you don't have an intellectual property right on it. And these countries in the Balkans, I mean, where are they from? Asia or something? I mean, they're Europeans too. So I think it is your fate to do what you're doing. And I would just gently suggest you pick up the pace.
That was a very gentle suggestion. So, General Clark, and then I'm going to look to organizers to give me time because I wouldn't mind doing a final round with people, but I don't quite know when we've got to close the panel. 5 minutes? Okay, so we're going to do maybe 1 minute each, 1.5 minutes each most. And so General Clark, pitch in, but then in this final round, if you can take a look at what concerns you most about that region right now and what gives you the most hope. So what keeps you awake at night and what makes you want to wake up in the morning with the region, please.
Well, I think that one real difference between now and the 1990s is in the 1990s, Russia wasn't really there in the region. We talked about Igor Ivanov and others. They were actually participating in peacekeeping in Bosnia at the time and relatively constructive with their battalion. That's not the case today. So they are deeply engaged in every country in the Balkans. And when I go through and talk to people, I find the little pieces of evidence. We know what's going on. If you talk to your intelligence agencies, they will tell you they're there. And so you're trying to pull Europe together in the face of a resistant medium in which there are forces, people, organizations working against the consolidation of peace and security in Europe. And I think we just have to be aware of this. And in the Western Balkans in particular, there's a small footnote to Bosnia and the Dayton Agreement called Kosovo, in which Chris was the ambassador in Macedonia. President Gligorov saw the massacre of the Jashari family in late February of 1998 and knew that conflict was coming. And today, Kosovo is an independent country. During the Dayton process, we couldn't get Milosevic to address Kosovo. He later did address it, but he addressed it with his military forces and his special police. And so this fracture between Serbia and Kosovo is raw today. There's no formed government in Kosovo after the last election, but there is serious concern about the future. And so it's not just Bosnia, it's not just the remnants of the 1995 Dayton Agreement that we should be concerned about. On the other side of Serbia, there is Kosovo, and it is waiting as a flashpoint to emerge at the wrong time.
So General Clark's concerned the different role of Russia now, the issue with Kosovo and Serbia. So I'm going to go in reverse order that we started. So I'll go with you first, Ambassador Pierce, and then Ambassador Hill, and then Prime Minister Bildt. We've got about 4 minutes among you, and so give a view of what concerns you the most, and if there's a sentence of what gives you some hope as well.
So picking up what Chris Hill said, I think it is about the countries of the region's ability to cooperate with each other, to want to cooperate with each other, and to put that into effect. 10 years ago, Germany created the Berlin process in order to try and bring about that detailed type of cooperation on public policy. The UK will chair the Berlin process this autumn, but I'm sorry to say it's too much of an uphill climb to get even basic things agreed, and it shouldn't be like that because there are better models available. Part of that ought to be including Serbia-Kosovo normalisation. We haven't yet found a way to help both those countries continue the progress that they've made in the past, and that like General Clark, worries me. I think the thing that I would think of is really going to hold the region back is the attitude to young people and the attitude of young people. We have, despite all our interventions, allowed a system to grow up where children are educated in separate silos according to religion or ethnic identity. We shouldn't have let that happen. We should have insisted on a much more multi-ethnic approach from the start, because it means that a generation has grown up since Dayton without really understanding their fellow citizens. And that worries me, how you put that right.
Thank you for that. Ambassador Hill.
First of all, I think that's important. And, you know, I've heard people say, well, people are being educated in different schools, and that's some kind of legacy of Dayton. There's nothing about that in Dayton. I mean, Dayton, I think, provided a platform where people could work on issues. And the only thing that was absolutely verboten in Dayton was you can't do things by force. You have to get consensus. I must say, as someone who was there, I never thought that 30 years later we'd be talking about it and, you know, how to make it a little better. So it has, for better or worse, stood the test of time. But I just can't emphasize enough. I know there was a Berlin process. There's something else called Open Balkans. Well, we're not there yet, so let's try something else, because they have to work together. We're not going to deal with the underlying problems. And as I said, the complexity of the Balkans just exceeds the interests of the rest of the world in following it. They're just sick of it. And, you know, people in the Balkans need to understand this better, that if you talk about some injustice that happened to you, you know, people's eyes glaze over, because there are a lot of injustices in the world. I mean, the Balkans is unique, but the problems of the Balkans are not unique, and I think that has to be made abundantly clear. So maybe some tough love is in order.
The complexity of the region out of whack with what people are willing to try to understand in the world. That's
understanding it.
That's a really fascinating, pilferable quote. So, Carl Bildt.
No, history and teaching and whatever key. I was involved after I had left my more active involvement in the Balkans. I was involved in a project trying to, with NGOs from the region, write a common history book. It failed. It failed. And it ended up writing books where it had the different versions of the same event. And then, of course, Balkans is not unique. I mean, the Germans and the Poles are struggling with their history. The French and the Germans struggled intensely with their particular history. The English and the Irish have some issues of history, and of course we are nowadays on good terms with the Danes, but it took some time. So the Balkans is not unique, and we should have respect for all of these differences. But then I think I think we're all saying the same thing here. The fact that the Kosovo war ended without a peace agreement is a major, major problem. And there needs to be a peace agreement for Kosovo at some point in time. We all know that is much easier said than done. But that's a major impediment to the entire region. But then, as I said, in the immediate years after Dayton, what worried me at that time was a lot of the politicians, virtually all of them, I would say, saw peace as the continuation of war by other means. And that sort of, the political maneuvering was the continuing of the military maneuvering for quite some time. That has faded, but is not entirely gone. So the region needs to learn the lessons of the rest of Europe, which has also gone through history and horrors and wars, but overcome it, and has to accelerate its Europeanization in order to overcome the problem that is there with the young people leaving and going to work and find their future in other parts of the world.
Thank you so much. The only thing I regret at the end of this incredible panel is A, we don't have more time to dig into these things, and B, we don't have a second panel right now with leaders from the Balkans coming up and responding to everything they've just heard. But I must say this for me was a real treat to have four panelists of this caliber, so thank you to Ambassador Pierce, Prime Minister Bildt, General Clark, and Ambassador Hill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kemp. I have a good news. We have good news for you, Mr. Kemp. We have some leaders of the Balkans right after you. Thank you very much for the panel. Ask them to Okay, thank you. It is Please take your seats. It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Gordon Grlić Radman, Foreign Minister of Croatia. He's coming. Mr. Minister, welcome. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Honorable Congressman Mr. Mike Turner, former mayor of Dayton. Thank you so much for having invited me, and I'm privileged to be today. It's a historic day for me here in Dayton. 30 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, of course, dear friends, dear colleagues, 30 years ago, after long years of conflict, peace for Bosnia and Herzegovina had become a reality. This is the true measure of importance of the Dayton Peace Agreement. However, peace has not brought stability, no true goal of the peace process, reconciliation. I'd like to ask of you to listen to me with an open heart and mind. What I have to say, although not new or unknown, is often disregarded for the sake of comfort found in oversimplifying complex historical and national issues. I will be blunt. Croatia was one of the first countries to recognize independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In the wartime, Croatia has harbored almost 1 million refugees and displaced persons, have provided a humanitarian lifeline to Bosnia and Herzegovina from and through our territory. He is a former wartime Foreign Minister Mate Granic, who was here in 1995. At the time, he was chairman of the headquarters for refugees and displaced persons, and we worked together. And Croatia did this in spite of local battles between Bosnia and Herzegovina Croats and Bosniaks, or among Bosniaks themselves. By liberating its own territory and then preventing Srebrenica-like scenario in Bihać in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia has turned the tide of war. And we have paid a heavy price in the lives of our own soldiers. But this is not to diminish the role played by Bosniak defenders. But their bravery has been matched by those of Croatian soldiers who had both the will and the means to bring their Serbian sides to the negotiating table. That would not have happened without us. The Dayton Agreement would have never happened without Croatia. And this is the true story of Dayton, and I was a witness. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a consensus in the international community in identifying separatism in Bosnia and Herzegovina as a clear threat. Yet equally, detrimental hegemonistic centralism is being ignored. Bosnia and Herzegovina Croats have not been able to exercise their constitutional right and elect their legitimate representative in the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina 4 times. All that in spite of the ruling by the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The spirit of Dayton Agreement, namely, ensured that each nation would elect its own representative, and it is not de facto. For Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is crucial who represents them, and not just what his or her ethnic affiliation is. Legitimacy comes from the trust of the community, not from the mathematical majority of another people. The right to representation is not a privilege, but a prerequisite to stability and peace. The calls for civic and unitary model of Bosnia and Herzegovina are nothing but a cover for the political domination of the majority people over the Bosnia and Herzegovina Croats happening to this day. The international community needs to realize that and support the European model of federalism as a response to both secessionism and suppressive centralism along the lines proposed by Johns Hopkins Professor Edward P. Joseph in Balkan Insight, published this week. Finally, I'd like to leave you with two thoughts. The first relates to our allies and partners in Europe and beyond. Further interventionist experiments will bring no good for Bosnia and Herzegovina. They will only tear into the very fabric of Bosnia and Herzegovina society, so carefully woven through centuries. They will shatter the delicate balance of power sharing between the three constituent peoples, Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats, a balance reflecting the country's history and multi-ethnic character now enshrined in its constitution. I do not doubt your good intentions, but action without proper understanding can only bring further trouble. My second message goes to the constituent peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina and their political leaders. I hope they will find courage to look ahead for compromise internally and do what is necessary and right for all fellow countrymen, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croats included, to feel at home in Bosnia and Herzegovina. A man asked his gardener why his plants grow so beautifully. The gardener said, I don't force them to grow. I remove what stops them. Please remove the obstacles so that everyone feels at home. As President Trump said a few days ago, true transformations do not come from foreign nation builders. They are interventions or lessons on how to live and govern one's own affairs. They do not come from the radical reflections of our own heritage upon foreign request. Peace and progress can only come from people that have lived here for all their lives. Wise word instead. Indeed, we should all listen. And I welcome also the speech of Deputy Secretary Landau. I appreciate everything what he said. Thank you so much.
Foreign Minister, thank you for your remarks and for taking the time to speak with us. It is now my pleasure to welcome Helmedin Konaković, Foreign Minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
I stand before you today as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, but first and foremost I want to tell you that during the war I was a minor who took up arms to defend my country, and I want to tell you that I know how precious peace is. It's really a much better option than war, trust me. My biggest challenge today is that I need to find a compromise and to create a dialogue with the people that I was literally fighting against 30 years ago, with those who are genocide deniers, those who are celebrating war crimes and criminals. But trust me again, it's much better than war. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, dear friends, today we gather to mark a powerful milestone, 30 years since the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement, an accord that ended the bloodshed that had taken thousands of lives and displaced millions. This peace, imperfect but vitally important, was made possible through tireless effort and leadership of American diplomacy together with allies. The people of Bosnia and Herzegovina will never forget the role that American diplomacy played, not only in silencing the war, but in giving us a chance to stand up and rebuild again. And even now, 3 decades later, the United States continues to stand by Bosnia and Herzegovina, supporting our sovereignty, our institutions, and our journey toward NATO and EU membership. This is why many refer to our country as one of the most successful foreign policy projects of the United States, a testament that peace can be built even in the aftermath of genocide and destruction. We are grateful to President Trump and his administration for pursuing the same vision. In that spirit, I want to extend a special gratitude to Congressman Turner, a longtime friend and advocate of Bosnia and Herzegovina. His voice in the United States Congress and his support for a sovereign and democratic Bosnia is something that we acknowledge and deeply value. We remember today not just the signatures on a treaty, but the people whose lives were shattered by war. We remember Sarajevo, under siege for nearly 4 years. We carry in our collective memory Prijedor, Visegrad, Foča, and above all, we remember Srebrenica. We do not speak of Srebrenica in anger, but in responsibility. We did not let our pain to consume us. We remember to remind the world that genocide must never happen again anywhere. We remember not to remain prisoners of the past, but to honor its lessons. That is how we learned to turn our scars into wisdom and rebuild our country from the ashes. 30 years ago, Bosnia was administratively reorganized into a district and 2 entities. One of these entities is called Republika Srpska, whose actual leadership has too often used the tools of Dayton to threaten statehood, to deny genocide, and to obstruct democratic development. But today, we must speak honestly. The political abuse of this system has reached alarming level and brought our country into deepest political and security crisis since Dayton. Yet together with crisis, new democratic voices emerged in Republika Srpska. Those voices bravely oppose President of Republika Srpska dangerous separatism and call for political accountability. They call for a political contract that benefits the whole society, not only privileged individuals. Together we share a common vision of prosperous, democratic Bosnia and Herzegovina. Therefore, I want you to note that this is not an ethnic-based crisis, as we have illegal forces on one side and a corrupt individual on the other. This anniversary is not just an opportunity to look back, but to look forward, to appreciate not only what Dayton ended, but what it began. It gave us a foundation that we must build upon. But 30 years after, we must ask, what kind of country do we want? The Dayton Agreement was designed as a framework for the development of the Bosnian state, not a framework to restrict its growth. For example, Article 3 of the Dayton Constitution explicitly obliged political leaders to take further steps to strengthen state institutions. Yet today, the Dayton framework is under assault by separatist forces. Just 2 months ago, the current leadership of Republika Srpska practically withdrew from the Dayton Agreement by adopting unconstitutional laws and obstructing the key state institutions to operate on its territory. Obviously, the current political system can be hijacked by a small political minority that thrives on divisions. This is not what Dayton intended. This is a threat to Bosnia and Herzegovina, but not only to Bosnia itself. It is a threat to the legacy of American diplomacy. It is a threat to the shared achievement of peace. We must stand together and defend that legacy. To preserve Dayton's intent, we need constitutional reform that prevents abuse of veto powers and political blackmail that keeps us paralyzed. Let us finally build the Bosnia and Herzegovina that was promised in Dayton 30 years ago, but not yet delivered in practice. The time has come to go beyond Dayton, not to disregard it, but to build upon it, to build a country where citizens have equal rights and opportunities. We must upgrade our system to protect citizens and ethnic rights in a way that will bring the ethnic segregation to the end. 4 years ago, Bosnia and Herzegovina became a world champion in terms of brain drain. In 2021, 130,000 young people left our country, a number which equals close to 4% of our population. We must build a society that will attract young people, not chase them away. We have come a long way since the Dayton 30 years ago. With the continued support of our international partners, especially the United States, and with the courage of democratic politicians from both Bosnian entities, our country could become more than a post-war success story. It could become a shiny symbol of what is possible, well, when the rule of law is protected and democracy truly embraced. All this with the aim of keeping young people in our country a beautiful land of good people and bad politicians. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Foreign Minister, for your remarks. I would now like to welcome Mr. Marko Đurić, Foreign Minister of Serbia. Foreign Minister, you have the floor.
Honorable Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, it's my honor to address you tonight on behalf of the Republic of Serbia, where the name Dayton has become, like in so many places across the world, a synonym for peace, a synonym for hope. Not merely and not only a name for roads, schools, and even the most frequented petrol station in downtown Belgrade, in fact. Dayton for us is more than just a political agreement. For us, Dayton is something that actually ended the bloody and brutal civil war that brought misery to every individual, not just in Bosnia and beyond. And I would like to thank you for the opportunity to address you here in Dayton and to state that contemporary Serbia, as one of the guarantors of the Dayton Peace Agreement, is a universe away from where it was 30 years ago. Contemporary Serbia is a country which is developing its economy at a rapid pace. In fact, we have more than doubled the size of our national GDP in less than a decade. And as we are striving to become full-fledged members of the European Union, we are also strongly believing in regional cooperation. New kids have grown in the Balkans, kids that do not believe that checkpoints are the only way to prove your national sovereignty and territorial integrity. And actually, I believe that many, many people in the Balkans are frustrated with borders and checkpoints and want to see a Schengen type of arrangement in the Balkans. And that's one of the reasons why, together with Albania and North Macedonia, we initiated the Open Balkans Initiative. We want to see more of that. Now, for the Republic of Serbia, Dayton Treaty remains a living, binding legal framework, an agreement that guarantees that the constitutional order and equality of the three constituent peoples and two entities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We continue to stand firmly behind it because we are convinced that lasting stability can only be built on the basis of common and joint future. Serbia fully supports the territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, while also advocating for the preservation of the constitutional competencies of the Republika Srpska as guaranteed by Dayton. Unfortunately, today, even on some panels and from certain interlocutors, we heard that peace is not enough. We have witnessed deeply concerning attempts to revise the Dayton Agreement, not through democratic consensus or inclusive dialogue, but through imposed decisions and efforts to forcibly centralize the state, undermining both its constitutional structure and the spirit of the original accord. We believe that this is not the way forward. Let me be very clear. Serbia believes in dialogue among equals in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We believe sustainable peace can only come from mutual respect, not top-down centralization efforts that dismiss internal structure of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Any attempt to centralize the country, particularly one that overrides the autonomy of its entities, is not just legally dubious, it is potentially destabilizing. There are those in Europe who advocate for a unitary Bosnia, often under the guise of creating a more functional state. Let me be frank, this is a disaster waiting to happen. Bosnia and Herzegovina is not a mono-ethnic state. The only viable path forward is one that respects its unique structure and the autonomy of its constituent peoples. Anything else risks undoing the very peace Dayton brought us. Let me assure you, Serbia will always be the most reliable and loyal partner in preserving peace and opposing both separatism and forced centralization. The situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina will remain complex as long as it is seen as black and white. There is no single hero or villain, only people, memories, pain, and the need for mutual respect. If we are truly committed to walking the path of the future, it is our responsibility not to deepen divisions or revive past conflicts, but to find a way forward towards mutual understanding, lasting peace, and a shared economic development that benefits all communities. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to commemorate the Dayton Peace Agreement, but also to reaffirm our commitment to its principles. If prosperity is to be enhanced, we must reject the illusion that it can be reached separately or by rewriting the balance that Dayton carefully constructed. Serbia remains steadfast on its path. We are committed to a future in which the Balkans are not only a zone of tension, but a space of opportunity founded on compromise, mutual respect, and a genuine commitment to shared progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Foreign Minister. It is now my pleasure to welcome a former member of this Assembly, His Excellency Christian Schmidt, High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Welcome back.
President of NATO Assembly, dear colleagues, if I may be allowed to address you in this way. Congressman Mayor Turner, thank you very much. I think this is extraordinary. I haven't seen and remembered such a situation in remembering and bringing us to the future path of interpretation of Dayton. We shortly talk about Dayton, not about Dayton Accords. Everybody talks in the Western Balkans about Dayton, and everybody knows where it comes from. We heard this. It comes a similar. Isn't this rare in the world that a city can be seen as a synonym for peace? Thank you, Mike Turner. Indeed, this peace agreement was unique and is unique. It included ad hoc mechanisms and instruments of international control to safeguard a sustainable peace, including human rights and a functioning democracy. And we have heard at the panel how complicated it was, because it was to find a compromise, to bring together those who have just had in the war been on several sides, and those who have experienced the suffering which we will remember this year, especially 11th of July in Srebrenica. As one of the childs of this Dayton peace agreement, as High Representative Annex 10 of the international community, me, am entrusted with the civilian implementation of this agreement. My mandate and my duties are part of these mechanisms. Just as my 7 predecessors, I am fully committed to maintaining the peace agreement and preserving the territorial integrity of Bosnia-Herzegovina, including the structure of this integrity of Bosnia-Herzegovina. This includes 2 entities and 1 district, Brčko. By the way, the formal implementation of the Brčko district as part of the Constitution is the only amendment which was agreed to bring into the Annex 4 Dayton Constitution. And me saying this as well refers to one of these problems we have, that the expectation that this living document of the Dayton peace agreement developed it in a pragmatic way. I would like to refer to Deputy Secretary of State Landau's description of expectation that it has to be developed, not only formal, but being adapted to the challenges of the present. I have to say that we are unfortunately a little behind our expectations in time. Carl Bildt, who was the first, I'm the 8th, and I would be working to be the last High Representative, just to see that there's the time and the possibility that the international community step by step can not remove, but can go more and more in the backup. In the backup because people are expecting that the international community is, in a case of a challenging situation, helpful. Those who have suffered for nearly 4 years in Srebrenica at the siege, they have not been fully convinced that the international community is assertive as it should have been, and we will hear such voices, understandably, 11th of July again in Srebrenica. But looking in the future, this means indeed the need for amendments needs to be developed by the people. It needs balance between the interests, a fair balance between the 3 plus the others to find a solution. We have heard that it is not easy to find between different sizes of the ethnic groups a balanced way. The Croat hint to the Constitutional Court decision, for example, about election of the members of the presidency, yes, some of these issues. The other is that up to now, nobody in Bosnia-Herzegovina who sees himself or is of Jewish origin, of Roma origin, or any other minority has any right to run for a member of the presidency of this country. This is not preparation for European integration. The European Court of Human Rights has been very clear already 15 years ago, and I have to report that nothing has been amended to the Constitution to fix this issue. So I see there are a lot of things which we have to do. Coming back to Dayton, I have to refer secondly that Bosnia and Herzegovina is still the subject of resolutions adopted under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. This implies that the international community still sees potential dangers for international peace and stability. Only a few weeks ago, in mid-March, EUFOR significantly reinforced its presence after there have been turmoils, you know this, caused by some responsible people in one entity, but not the entity itself, not at all, but they started to initiate political and legal actions that constitute attacks on the constitutional order of BIH in Dayton. They have been not followed. I may underline that this is a proof of democratic and political plurality. There has been inside the entity Republika Srpska an intense dissenting political discussion, and so shouldn't I say that this is a proof that democratic development in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I may report to you, has made its way. By the way, as well as the resilience of the judiciary seems to be very strong, because with all the attempts which have been tried to push and put on the judiciary, on judges, they stood. So I think we should come back to another question. They said original Dayton. Again, Dayton. What means original Dayton? Yes, original Dayton means you have to obey the accord which has been done in Dayton. This includes the Constitutional Court especially. This includes, by the way, as well the High Representative and its possibilities.